Hi everybody, I'm Kelton. I'm in Gadigal land as well. Hi Sophia. um, and Thanks everyone for coming. I'm going to share my screen and we're going to speak for a bit, show some photos, show some videos of the Let SCA Stay campaign and talk about some of the lessons that we can take into organising that we're doing today, and campaigning in general, and people feeling like they want to be involved in campaigns. I'll share my screen. There we go. And so there'll be lots of time at the end to have a discussion, depending on how many people end up being here. We'll maybe go into some breakout rooms, and I've got like a discussion question or two that we can sort of work off of. Also, can you see my video? Like, as in, maybe it doesn't matter. I'm just wondering whether it's blocking the PowerPoint or not. It doesn't. There's just photos. Doesn't matter. All right. So, the art of struggle. Basically, the things I'm going to talk about start off a little bit about SCA's history, what Sydney College of the Arts is, and how universities became neoliberal. Very briefly, though, because I'm going to move mainly into talking about the campaign and giving a flavour for what it was like, because it was a massive campaign. And by massive, I mean it engaged like well over 1,000 people. There were like hundreds of people who came through the occupation at some point, stayed a night. The occupation lasted for 65 days. It was mass in the sense that it looked to and involved the majority of the faculty of that SCA was. So we'll get into more of what that means, but it was a massive campaign, and it really I think sets a precedent for what campaigns can be in the 21st century at universities. So the key themes are democracy, disruption, escalation, the middle ground of students, and how like activists and sort of leadership of campaigns relates to that middle ground of students, and how to build strength from the mass of students. And then the final point is a little bit about transformation and struggle, and sort of what a new world could be that you kind of get a glimpse out of. And some of, I think, and I found personally by being involved in this campaign, like it was what convinced me of my politics and ideas. They were on paper in some ways, but actually being involved in this and living and breathing the struggle is what really changed that. And then we'll talk about the future tasks today, and sort of general lessons for the struggle. So this is SCA, beautiful, beautiful campus. SCA sort of, it came out of the art movements, that the idea for the education came out of the art movements of the late 1960s. So you had basically art was changing as a oops, the next one. Art was changing it was becoming conceptual. Art was no longer just about techniques, and the educational institutions, or SCA in particular, pushed to have art be more about ideas, and was really coming out of like 1968 protest movements, May 68 in France. And it was created as a center of advanced, college of advanced education. So before we have universities now, I'll explain this in just a second. Before there was universities and also colleges of advanced education, a binary system, two different systems of education. So this was free. It came, made under the Whitlam times when education was free. It was really embodied that idea of sort of the progressive art movements that it was responding to and educating from. It had a creche, so students who had kids could come and drop their kids off, and they'd be looked after for the day. And so particularly women who, single mothers, for instance, were able to drop their kids off at their school and continue to learn and study. But the big thing I think that was involved in the education of what SCA was it was about studio-based practice. Instead of learning techniques about art, you learnt about ideas, and the studio was like a laboratory. You have this space where you immerse yourself in whatever the discipline is, sculpture or painting or whatever, but it was about testing ideas and doing it with your hands, and learning by actually doing. An embodied education, quite different to sort of the lecture hall Zoom sort of lecture situation that we sit through now through most of our education. So this was the beautiful big campus that SCA had when it merged into the University of Sydney in 1991, Kirkbride in Callan Park. Massive. So students really had space to think and had space to engage in everything they wanted to, had communal space to relate to other artists and their ideas, space to connect with other artists in their studios, space to socialize. It's a really beautiful campus. So what happened to higher education? Well, the Neoliberal University, I think, came about in the late 1980s, beginning of the 90s. People might have heard of something called the Dawkins reforms. The Labour Minister for Education at the time, John Dawkins, really revolutionized education and put it in the sort of image that we know of what universities are today. So instead of these College of Advanced Education and universities, he basically said there's going to be one system, and you have to have 8,000 students to be able to get funding. If you don't have 8,000 students in your institution, you get no government funding. So there was this crazy period where all these smaller institutions, small schools like SCA that had 500 students, had to find a mass university to become part of, and all art education became part of universities essentially. There's a few outliers that run through state governments, but largely all through universities. And so the universities that were trying to be created were really about shifting sort of what Australia needed after the 1970s and 1980s, when there was different types of economic crisis globally and sort of new pattern of accumulation. You had liberalizing trade deals. You had this need to stimulate economic growth that had sort of been flowing under a Keynesian system before that. And this real push for the stimulation of economic growth, the government decided they needed to skill people in a very different way at universities, and they needed to have a skilled labor force that was based around the services economy that we live in now. And so all the Masters of Art degrees, investment in engineering, business degrees, the universities expanded in this way. And in Australia, this was set up in a way where government funding was reduced and students had to start paying fees. That only started in 1989 under the Labor government. And that was fought by students. And the university system became increasingly, each university was sort of competing against other universities to get students. And this competition has turned universities into a business. And the Dawkins reforms really articulated you had to become a business and function like a business. And Stephen Garton, when I interviewed him, who's the former Vice Chancellor of Sydney University and the guy in the photo here, he even said to me, to my face, the university is a business. He analysed it saying that Sydney University, if it was floated on the stock exchange, would be the 267th, I think he said, largest company in Australia. So it needs to be managed as such. It's a huge financial institution. Like this is the logic now that we live with, rather than universities are places where academics are encouraged to think critically and encouraged to challenge the world around them. Instead, we live in a university system where they really are run by a small senior management group, CEO-style vice chancellors. I mean, Sydney University's vice chancellor is a CEO right now, Mark Scott. He was the CEO of Fairfax Media, ran the Department of Education, like large other sort of institutions that are part of Australian capitalism. And now he's running Sydney University. It's very much interchangeable in the way universities are run. So SCA, wait, go to the next screen. There we go. This is a portrait of the Mr. Stephen Garton, Mr. Lizard Man himself, by an SCA student during the campaign. Might actually be able to see it over my shoulder as well. I bought it at a fundraiser very happily. But the thing that I found researching the SCA campaign, because I was both part of it and have written my honours thesis on it as well, is that people really found at SCA that the management of the university acted like another species, like they were a lizard of some sort. So I thought this sort of embodied that and wanted to throw it in for people. So we go a bit too fast. So at Sydney University, SCA was at first amalgamated in and lived a relatively peaceful life for a number of years, sort of separated off in its new home in Kirkbride, kind of untouched. But as the university continued to progress and change as a more and more business-like institution, it had less and less need and interest in SCA and its student numbers. And in 2016 to 2020, you had a drive by the strategic plan by the university to rationalize a whole bunch of things on campus, to rationalize faculties. There were 18 faculties, I believe it was. They wanted to turn it to 5. They've tried to rationalize all the campuses. So SCA was at a satellite campus in Rozelle. They wanted to close it and move it to main campus, or to get rid of it actually was their original plan. But they've tried to do it. They have like 65 different campuses around Sydney and New South Wales, and they've tried to get rid of a lot of the smaller ones so they can focus on building a massive campus in Western Sydney that they are going to be putting billions of dollars into an investment. That's really their strategy to recruit more students on the same logic of competing against Western Sydney Uni, UTS, UNSW for student fees so they can, in their mind, prosper, but obviously in educational terms, not really prosper. Quite the opposite, which is the case here. So they told SCA that it would be merging into the rest of, they told SCA that they were going to be merging into the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences. There was a little bit of unrest, but what really sparked everything and pissed people off is that they actually been lying, and they've been planning to get rid of SCA entirely and make it part of COFA and sort of a merged school with the UNSW Art School and the National Arts School in Paddington. And this lie, and it was distinctively a lie. Like articles came out that explained that they've been talking about it for 18 months and they were going through the same preliminary consultation phase with staff and students. And there'd been this sort of idea that you could just consult with them and they'd come up with a good plan. But actually they'd been working behind the scenes to be doing something entirely different. And then they floated that and students were incredibly pissed off. One point I'd like to just add in and make now is I think the education officer at the time and the two education officers that year did a really, really good job of how they strategized dealing with the campus and the university. So they had two different roles. One was focused on the National Union of Students protests, sort of fighting the Liberal government in the national focus way and federal focus. The other focused on how to actually find students and engage them in fighting for their education. So that education officer went around and did petitions, went to classrooms and talked to students, did stalls at the satellite campuses, trying to find out what issues were going on. And they had set up some meetings at SCA and actually built a groundwork and connection and relationship with a bunch of students that meant when this had happened, there was already a platform to do something about it, which was incredibly important as time went on. So when the lies came out that SCA was going to be closed, there was this mass anger and a mass meeting straight away, and about 250 SCA students. There's only 600 students at this campus. About 200 to 250 came to a meeting the very next day, and they organized to run this forum when Stephen Garton was going to come in 3 days' time, I think it was from then, and speak to students and staff and sort of tell them what the plan was. And they organized this mass angry forum. They had been lied to, they'd been cheated, and they collectively decided we're going to absolutely grill this guy. So I'm going to show a quick video of it because it is really hilarious. And also just shows the sort of level of anger and intensity and I guess organization as well that went into this. Can people hear that?
Yes.
We can still only see your PowerPoint though.
Yeah, we can't see the video.
You haven't,
Oh.
you've shared the PowerPoint instead of your desktop. So you go share.
Maybe stop sharing and then just reshare the thing.
Thank you for the help. Is that better?
Yes.
Cool. He starts his speech for a bit and then you can just get a flavor of what happens. So they would start yelling at him and heckling him constantly. They call the dean to the stage and then they have a roving mic that takes over and they basically just cut him off and don't let him talk. And they just berate him for an hour and a half.
bless you, that you actually paid me to lie to students, because for you to have had those meetings, events don't pop up overnight. So you would have had to instruct the event company to make sure that the College of the Arts didn't appear on here, the College of the Arts didn't appear on social media, and I actually believed it when I told those children that they.
It's interesting, it's just flipped to Madeline here, because she was one of the people who was on the consultative committee, and then she was totally like flipped by like, we can just talk to management and work with them, but the fact she actually experienced that management had lied to her face and had gone behind her back and were not to be trusted and dealt with meant that she became one of the most active proponents of fighting management, at least at this phase. Video kind of ends with, put the Zoom thing in the way. It ends with a petition being presented to both of them, them not signing on.
We're not made aware of this change when they're enrolled at any time soon.
And then them being off the campus. It was obviously a huge display of like students' anger, and it scared the shit out of him in a lot of ways. Actually, Stephen Garton said to a friend of his that he wished he'd turn around and left as soon as he saw the room that he was entering later on, which I found out through an interview. And also, when I talked to him about it, he said it was the most disgraceful display he'd ever seen from students. It was a theatre performance stunt. However, with this and a handful of other actions, the plan to close SCA and have it just be absorbed into a different art school was cancelled within a month. So the point I wanted to make about democracy comes in the next phase. There was a protest of the Senate during the holidays, about 400, the July holidays in the middle of the year. There was about 400 students who came along to this protest. And like, that's a really sizable amount of SCA. There was a question over how to organize the protest and what actually to do. And Madeline, the person who you saw before, and a couple sort of students had this focus that they would run everything and students would just become involved as they went along, and they would just listen to what they had to say because they were student representatives, and that would be that. And at the organizing meeting for this Senate protest, which ended up being a huge walk through the campus in the middle of July, going to the business school and just taking over the business school with hundreds of students chanting and being really angry. The only way that students felt like they could really continue in this campaign and do this was because they actually had a voice in it. And like, actually democratizing the campaign was something that just was not intuitive necessarily at the beginning, because people hadn't been involved in left-wing circles or campaigns before. But the activity of democratizing, having people vote on decisions, taking ownership for their decisions, it meant that like the radical actions that people en masse could take had radical consequences, rather than just a radical actions of a couple people taking would have much less consequence, much less effect on senior management. Yeah, this is the cops ended up blockading the Senate. And this guy who was on the Senate at the time, he said still that he thought it was all going to go ahead, but students persisted, and the plan was overturned to take SCA and move it into the other art schools. The other thing that came up early on in the campaign was this sort of radical creativity. And there was this discussion about how to sort of engage with that creativity. It was something that was always thought about during the campaign. One thing that a bunch of students made was called the SOS SCA Vigilantes. And the Vigilantes were like a call out of like Save Our Souls. They did this amazing protest, really beautiful, colourful capturing protest at the Art Gallery of New South Wales at the launch of the Archibald. And again, it had fantastic effect on bringing artists together and sort of this process of we're going to stand in the way, we're going to be involved and disrupt. Which brings us to second semester, the plan goes away, and the sort of question on activist hands is how do we actually save this school entirely? So it had, well, can everyone see me? You can? Oh, I just couldn't see myself. I was just looking at the white screen, just getting a bit confusing. Okay, cool. So the plan had basically been, now you're going to be moved into the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences. We're going to cut about 60% of your staff. There's no building to put you in. We're going to leave you high and dry. The proposal had been dead in the water for the last one, but we have no real plan about what to do with this art school with 600 students and a fabulous history. And we had to figure out how we were going to escalate. We'd had protests. We had a lot of students decide this idea that disruption was really crucial to being able to plow forward and actually make an impact on management's decisions to show radical student collectivity in doing that. And we decided we wanted to run a student strike, which again would engage as many students as possible. One choice photo, if anyone knows Adam, they know that this is something Adam will do forever, which is talk and argue with you about why you should be involved in a campaign. Adam went to SCA for both his undergrad and postgrad, and was a leading activist in this campaign as well. And I thought this photo just epitomizes that. You stand on a stall and you talk to as many students as possible and you win them over. Our meeting for launching the student strike, which was going to be a full day strike, we had 140 students who came and voted on the strike. Again, the fact that they were there, that we'd done the building of talking to so many people, that we'd really been having all the arguments about everything confusion to do with them in the campaign, just talk, patiently explain, had brought all these people here. And then their vote was actually an inclusion of, I want to be part of this campaign. I want to be part of this escalation. I'm willing to shut down my class to do that. The strike was incredibly successful. We had, there was like maybe 6 or 8 people left at the school that day. We got on buses, and where can I make a painting this big was one massive painting that was left on Michael Spence, the ex-Vice Chancellor's doorstep. But we piled onto buses the SRC had hired for us and made our way to main campus, making up chants on the way about, what sort of things we wanted to save about the different studios that were under threat still. Glass, jewelry and ceramics were all going to be cut, and we're making chants up on the bus and stuff like that. This feeling of collectivity, and that you have all these students who've never been involved with left campaigning, who had now felt some sort of ownership over this campaign, and were willing to take that next step of walking out of class and going and protesting when they'd probably never been to a protest or many protests at all before. Again, here's the day. Really beautiful banners that everyone made, colorful, very, very, one of the most colorful campaigns or protests I've ever been involved in. Now, on our way back, we'd thought about this idea of an occupation. This is one of the things that sort of stands out about SCA's history. And I will try to wrap up soon so we can have some discussion. But the occupation that we ended up doing of SCA was 65 days long. It's the longest occupation of any administration building in Australian student history. And I'll get into more about it soon, but one of the things we knew, whenever you in a campaign have an idea, you want to do something, you want to escalate and take it to the next step, you have to escalate. You have to test it in some ways. You have to know whether students are actually going to follow you into doing that. Leadership can't just operate as I know this is the right thing to do, so I'm going to say it and everyone should do it. It had to be actually something that people felt like they were agreeing with, experienced, understood in some way. So we decided to do a little test occupation on the way back of the first student strike. And I actually think that this photo is Erima next to me and Dylan discussing the idea of it. It was sort of like, should we do this? Should we do this? And it was to go and occupy the student center. And we did, with like 150, 200 students ended up following us into the student center and stayed in there chanting. We took it over for about half an hour, 45 minutes. We said, if SCA is going to be shut down, there'll be people in this building who have to do the administration work to shut it down. We're not against the staff members, we're against the people who are making the decisions, and we know that they're in this building. And we stayed there, we disrupted, we chanted, we made speeches. When the riot police came, we said, okay, we'll go now, and we walked out. But that sort of experience for all these students, that actually you could take a space, you could occupy something, I think was quite important to sort of the gung-ho nature of actually, we will take the next space, we can occupy this and we can continue that occupation. So the fabled occupation starts in week 6 or so of semester 2. A handful of people met in the morning with a whole bunch of locks and chains and logs and an acro prop, which is like this industrial metal reverse screw that like extends out and can hold doors together. We really barricaded ourselves in, and one critique even from some of the organizers and in years past now is that we focus too much on holding ourselves in and that securing ourselves in with locks and chains, whereas actually the thing that secured us was having masses of students who supported us. That was the thing that made us strong. And that was the point that we always had to keep reaffirming. And that got challenged really early on. The university cut off our Wi-Fi, said we were all main campus students. It's about a third there maybe that are main campus students in the first night, maybe third to half, but it was also very much SCA students who were leading that drive and stayed in the occupation for a whole heap of time. This photo is a classic under new management, running a new system of education and starting to think about what a new art school would look like. Being in the occupation wasn't just sort of you sit there and this is cool, we took the space. It kind of was for a few seconds, but then it was like, shit, are the cops going to come? Like, what's going to happen? How do we like let anyone know? It just became this hyper workstation where we like ran 2 to 3 meetings a day discussing everything from like whether the space would be dry, whether we would go out and you know, try to campaign to other students, whether we would be calling the media press releases, trying to call unions to get their support. It was just constant, and it was really a workspace with a lot of pizza eating too. We had pizza delivered from students in Germany to us. We had a pulley that we pulled food up out of a basket and fed ourselves. Someone's mum brought, there was so much cake. It was just, everyone gave us cakes. But part of it was we couldn't just run the occupation and then not tell anyone about it. First thing was tell everyone, run a rally in support of it, put out a press release, and that's how people found out and sent us cake. I just thought that was a brilliant photo of Lily getting very stressed. I think she was actually doing an assignment, but that was the situation. We were sitting in there, living all the things in the back there. You see different ideas, putting up newspaper articles, just brainstorming constantly. I put these 2 photos next to each other because the thing that really saved us and was able to help us expand the occupation was that we had union support. When you think about sort of who will actually come and support, who will support you when push comes to shove? Like, was it going to be the donors who, you know, were going to come and defend this occupation with us, or was it going to be unionists? And actually it was the MUA, the Maritime Union of Australia, who the year before students had gone down for their strike and had supported them for like a 100-day strike they had over conditions and pay on the ports. And they came back and supported us. They helped us raid the occupation past security once and bring a whole bunch of new students in. They donated us a shower, which we desperately needed. They donated $1,000 as well, just for general funds. They helped with support rallies and bringing members along. One time we thought the cops were going to come and kick us out. They came in the middle of the night. It was a curfew, the cops weren't coming, but they came and drove over to like stand against the cops and picket and so forth and fought off the cops to defend us. So there really was a clear thing that, you know, they're the ones who know how to fight corporate institutions. The university was a corporate institution, so we had to fight that. And that's when the MUA came in one day, and we went to speak at the MUA on the ports as well and tell them about our struggle. They saw the solidarity lines very, very clearly. This bulletin, and I might just start sort of skipping through a few things, it's running out of time, but we had to constantly speak to more and more students about getting them involved in the occupation. There's a lot of hesitancy, like, oh, hold on, why will the occupation work? What's the strategy? Do I really want to be, like, I'm really be involved in this? Seems kind of radical. And so it was just countless hours of conversations, running these Q&A sessions, trying to just build in as many students as possible to taking ownership over the campaign, feeling like they were involved, invested, and believed in it. Famous unionist Jack Mundy came and visited us, which everyone was very stoked about. Constant rallies and barbecues at the front of this occupation every weekend, often during the week as well, to just show that we constantly had mass support. And that was the reason why the cops didn't raid us. The university didn't want to raid us because we had mass support. Like the Telegraph was putting out articles 3 times a week, something about the SCA occupation or the campaign. You know, the dean ended up resigning during the occupation as we were sitting in his desk drinking his wine. sitting in his desk, sitting at his desk, sleeping in his office, drinking his wine, et cetera, et cetera. Like, we had the moral high ground because we had so many people supporting us, and that was crucial to have that from the SCA students first, and then to have it from a wider layer of his COFA students, the other art school that was going to be merged into, Braidwood's arts community down the south coast. You know, there was countless things like this where we had a whole array of photos. Down the very bottom left-hand corner, there's one of the members of Lesbians and Gays Support the Miners who sent us a solidarity photo. If people have seen the movie Pride, that was quite cool. And then on to the transformational experience. I'll try to wrap up after this. The situation of being in this struggle so intensely for such a long period of time gave people this incredible idea of what a different world would be like, what a different sort of communication and connection between people would be like. Yes, we were extremely stressed and working extremely hard, but the lines of solidarity and human connection and communication that built up between people were really profound. This photo is maybe a good example of a sleeping bag, cuddle, and sets of laughter. Here's Rohan sitting at the dean's desk, maybe doing an assignment, maybe just posing, I don't know. And I'll read out a couple quick quotes. It was like having a little family. It became my whole world, a pivotal moment in my life. I don't quite know how to talk about it. I did meet the love of my life. I had a relationship that was breaking down because I wasn't the person that I was supposed to be in the marriage, but I was exactly the sort of person I was meant to be at the Occupy. Whatever that means, whatever implications that has, it's really clear this is where I need to be. I literally packed my sleeping bag and left home and came to stay in Occupy. It was an amazing feeling for me to go, yep, marriage is over. This life is beginning for me again, repatching itself together. One final one. That's almost the most beautiful part of the campaign to me. My mind was totally blown over those 6 months about how the world could work. There was a genuine belief that the collective knowledge of the group was superior to the knowledge of any one person. Even if you were wrong or you lost an argument, it was good to lose the argument because it was better for the group. It was a genuine kind of democracy. The success of the campaign and the success of the ideas. It was the most transformative experience of my life in terms of shaping the person I am today. And there were stories abound about that in the occupation. The campaign didn't win everything. We had a second strike. We tried to occupy the front of the quadrangle. The cops came and cleared us in the morning. And one thing that had happened, we painted this incredibly huge banner, right, that went from the top of the quad down to the bottom. But while it was this incredible art project and incredible piece of protest history that we made a banner and managed to climb up to the top of the quad and drop it off, I thought this photo was extremely telling about the contradiction involved in it, that we focused by this point too much on making this banner, too much on putting this stunt up, and we didn't actually have enough mass support to carry it out. We spent too much time painting it rather than talking to students. And it's unfortunate there's photos of Juju, because Juju was one of the best people at talking to lots of students and going around having those conversations. But I thought it showed a certain imagery of eventually the way the campaign went. And I think a lot of left campaigns are very much focused sometimes on, you know, how do we take the action rather than how do masses of students take that action? How do we build in thousands more students? How do we have those conversations? And it's difficult and hard, but this was a campaign and situation where hundreds of students became seriously involved and thousands of people were affected by it, signed petitions, took the understanding of student power very, very seriously. All right, I'm going to shut up now. Maybe just quickly, can I take a show of hands who, let me just get back to Zoom, stop sharing my screen, although I'll go back to the discussion questions in a sec. Can I get a show of hands who would be able to stay after 4 to continue a discussion? Because we maybe go into breakout rooms and have some chats and have a bit more chance to float ideas around about it. But people just want to put the reactions, raise hand if you can stay after 4, or little twinkle. Got some raise. We got about half or so. Maybe a little bit over half. Okay, well, we might just sort of try to wrap up at 4 and then keep the discussions going after that. The discussion question I had was, wait, let me share the screen again, sorry. Oh no, sorry. discussion question I had. Well, there we go, finally. How can the lessons of Let SCA Stay inform current campaigns that we're involved in? And obviously that largely relates to the Save Arts campaign right now. The photo on the left, it's not a merger, it's a delete. Delete was a word that the Dean used the other day in the meeting. But also if you've never been involved in a campaign before and in sort of organizing activism, what do you think happened at Let SCA Stay and in this campaign that might have pulled you to being involved in a campaign like this? And how can activists think about using those sort of ideas in their campaigning? So maybe if we want to break into two groups and have a bit of a chat about that in breakout rooms, and then come back and sort of join in a collective discussion. I mean, we talked, Beatrice had some interesting points. Beatrice is at ANU Art School that has been facing cuts and also is likely to face more cuts, and sort of was taking notes on that sort of basis and thinking about that. I mean, the main thing I think everyone talked about was sort of just how seeing this big campaign and like how much it meant involving so many students and taking ownership for it, and democracy, and something that we kind of struggle with in left campaigns, where sometimes we do spend a lot of time thinking about ourselves rather than, and you know, that is important, that has to happen, but being quite insular and not really figuring out how we can connect broader layers of students. And I think Cooper put it like, that is the only crucial question. Like, the left can't defeat the Neoliberal University. The left can't defeat capitalism. The left can't defeat colonialism. The left can't even defeat like a small employer often, you know, like the left can't do that. It is about a much, much larger basis in society doing that. And we want those people to do that now. And that means connecting to them where they're at, and a lot of conversations. I think that was the gist.
Absolutely. I'll speak from our group. So we spoke about how important it was that the campaign was a democratic, like very student-led situation, that there was no like particular leaders or anything, and all students felt like it was their campaign and that they were involved in the decision-making and they had responsibility from early on. And it was mentioned that maybe a pitfall or like a limit of the campaign was the fact that there wasn't as much staff involvement brought in, and like there weren't staff strikes, which maybe limited the wins that could have been made. But yeah, real focus on how important like democratic organizing is, and students thinking that they have autonomy over their own campaigns.
Is Tundi still here? No. Tundi was one of the SCA students and the one who painted the lizard of Garton, which is particularly funny because she was family friends with Garton's kids, and family friends with Garton, and then like knew him when he came that day and like stared him down and was like, and then painted a lizard of him. And anyway, I thought Tundi might be able to add some more sort of anecdotal stuff in.
She had to go.
Sorry?
She had to go, she said.
Okay. We also had Liam in our group. Liam, is there anything else you want to add? Liam was the education officer and very involved in the campaign.
I mean, yeah, it was like an awesome trip down memory lane, and also like great to hear that, I mean, students are still organising against those sort of cuts. And I think, yeah, discussions like this are really important. Yeah, I thought, like, as I said in the group, like, I still think a lot of the questions are really relevant to like activism and campaigns I'm involved in now. Like, how do we broaden like the struggle to like free like the refugees imprisoned and like hotels in Melbourne CBD like out from the actual left, because that's an issue I see in that campaign. And I do think it was interesting that the like staff aspect was focused on. Like, I think maybe it's because like there's more like rank and file like left-wing involvement in the NTU, but like from my memory, like I mean, it wasn't the NTU itself, it was like more the leadership. They were always like more resistant to that collaboration. Like whenever from the start of my term when we were trying to do stuff with them, it was very much like they had to be completely in the leadership role, and, you know, it wasn't as much of a partnership. So I think I definitely think that situation's improved just from like an outsider observation. So I think that's really good, because I do think that was like quite crucial. And like Kelton reminded me that, yeah, like them saying, oh, we'll run it on main campus was sort of really crucial in like not winning the whole battle to stay at Roselle when it was such a beautiful and special campus. Like I remember going like to the end of year art show and just being like, it'd be such a tragedy if like this like spatial place didn't survive.
I have a question. Is that okay? Just on like, what was the response with SCA staff specifically, or like how was the sort of relationship built, and like what was the general response in terms of like getting action specifically from like the staff at SCA?
It was mixed and it changed. Everyone was against the new school, like it was just an idiotic plan. Like SCA had a very particular identity, and the whole reason it existed was it was different to COFA and it was different to NAS. So putting them together was like, you're just a fucking idiot. Like no one thought that was a good idea. And eventually no one, like the other institutions, the leadership started backing out as well. It was just like a financial decision for them. But so staff were originally totally against it. They had a big meeting at one of the painting teachers' houses a couple of days after, and their focus though was on lobbying. And there was this sort of large element of the campaign, which was, we're going to get donors on side. We're going to have like that art thing out the front of the Biennale, the Archibald. The whole idea of that was that they were going to, like, it was released with a letter that was signed by 100 notable figures. And those 100 notable figures in the Sydney Morning Herald had signed it. And it was about trying to use the high end of town basically to say, you're not going to move us. And I think there's like nothing wrong with trying to reach out to those people and have some of that effect. But I think it misses really the way the university is run and functions. Like Garton said to me when I interviewed him, he was like, yeah, the donor did come and donors can say things if they want. We'll always speak to donors, but we're not going to listen to them. They don't run this institution, we do. And Michael Spence supposedly, this is just obtuse, Michael Spence, the ex-Vice Chancellor, he married someone who did their PhD at SCA, and he met them sort of through SCA and one of the shows. And so he said, so he has a $10 million something mansion that the university pays for or paid for when he was Vice Chancellor. He said when one of the donors came, this is secondhand from someone who heard it from the donor, but he said, I don't even think they need studios. My wife painted her last painting on the kitchen table. Think about how big his fucking marble kitchen table is. Like, what a bust. Anyway, but back to the start, that was very much part of the strategy early on, but they were very backing of students. However, there was a clear point where divisions very sharply emerged. And this is just a reality with the way universities are right now and the hyper-competitive nature of how staffing is set up, that there are really rifts within a lot of staff groups. And there is a lot of animosity for various reasons. And staff at SCA thought that that had been manufactured for a long time to sort of maintain the dean's role, to maintain, even if there was something like this going to happen, they wouldn't be able to fight back, sort of an in and an out group. And so the in and the out group got very split on political lines once the new proposal was there could be a thing on main campus. And when some staff had enough confidence, they just split, and 4 or 5 of them went and talked to Garton directly and said, we'll run the new school for you. And he said, wonderful, new school then, we'll do it that way. And garnered the money to invest in it. But there was really a split there. And the NTU, which is just, I think, something activists should remember in general, the NTU is so scared of taking any sort of industrial action outside of the bargaining period. And it's rubbish. Melanie here went and walked out last year for medical science, like afternoon off, we're walking out, this is a walkout, we're not going back to work, bunch of lab coats sitting outside their building. That was illegal industrial action, nothing happened. We looked into it at the point, most of what happened, maybe $1,000 fines for each of them. That was less than what we got fined for protesting, last year during the fee hikes campaign. Like, they are petrified of it, but their strategy is always wait until enterprise bargaining. So at SCA, they said, wait another year when it's enterprise bargaining, then we'll take action. A year later, no staff were there with it. Like they'd lost their jobs, so they couldn't take industrial action. Like that was a dead end strategy. But it's a big fight against sort of how we need to be uniting staff in whatever we can and taking action now and building the confidence of that. And there was a lot of confidence around that, but it also halfway, 3/4 of the way through started crumbling. And it was manufactured, those splits. They really pushed hard on doing that. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's just also like an endorsement of like a bottom-up approach, because like, yeah, like Anthony Albanese, I think, said something vaguely in support, like, but that wasn't the crucial stuff. It was like, I think like the community awareness that was created through like the rolling student action was like the key part of that, like public, like front-facing campaign. Like, yeah, like Kelton was saying, like there were news articles just constantly, like, because like I think it just was so vibrant. And that's another thing, like the reason also I think it was such a vibrant and like historically significant campaign was also that like it sort of included like and had the spirit of like those students. Like it was a campaign that clearly was run by and for art school students, and that was like such a distinction, I think, from other student campaigns, and it could only really have come out of like SCA. Like, so I think that's something real. Like the only thing I've ever heard that was like similar to that was like in the VSU campaign, obviously, like separate student communities through student unions did like action specific to them. And I think maybe that's something like that people could take from it. Like, it like campaigns need to like, they're so much more interesting and dynamic if they reflect this like interests and character of the students. Yeah.
Does anyone else have any questions or comments, contributions, anything to add in?
In the other group, did anybody address if they hadn't been involved, or how they would be drawn into it, what would have made them come into it? Because I think that's always a challenge when you've got a group that have a real vested interest in it, but they need the support of the rest of students from different faculties and whatever. Did anybody talk about that in your group, Kelton?
Not really.
No. Okay.
Maybe just as a final comment, sort of on what Liam was saying there, like the unique character of it being SCA. There was a tension within that I found very interesting in reflecting on. Like there was this thing that it had to be an art campaign. It had to be like an artist, you know, had to have art everywhere. And there was this big idea that actually, if we made good enough art, or not we, I was not an SCA student, I was a main campus student, but like if the SCA students made good enough art, then the school could be saved. That was, and it sort of functioned on the same idea as lobbying. Like if we're able to convince the powers that be of our value, just whether it's a good argument or whether it's a good artwork, then we'd be allowed to stay. And there was a tenet of that within the campaign. The other tenet was, we have to disrupt this business. And when we disrupt them enough, they will crack and they will keep us there. And we will show that we can be powerful enough to run this institution if we redouble that, triple that across the entire institution. That's the way, that's the strategy for running the Neoliberal University from the bottom up. There was always a tension in that. And I think I was definitely very culpable of not respecting that actually was a balance as well, that we needed to win the disruption, but the disruption didn't come unless you had the actual character of the art. And yes, you had to argue against art as lobbying, but you had to be for and be the biggest proponent of art as protest and artistic protest as part of that. And I think myself and a few others were definitely guilty of sort of being like a bit hard-headed about, no, we have to go to the next thing, we have to push forward. We did have to, but our argument had to be, we have to do that and we can incorporate the art in doing that, and working with people slightly better on that. And maybe that's something to think about as we go into the Save Arts campaign as well. How do we incorporate people's sort of unique character in it and win them to the strategy that we're after, which is mass disruption, which is everyone's involved in this, everyone's a player in it. And yeah.
Because the sweet spot was always the middle ground. Do you get what I mean? Like, that was when it was most memorable, was when those two forces like met together. And yeah, like it was also, like, I just remember how stark those tensions got, like towards the end, like almost like some of it was like ridiculous. It almost like felt like, I mean, like an art student like isn't an identity. Do you get what I mean? Like, and I think that was something like that I really remembered. But yeah, like it was because the people who wanted those divisions really picked up on that. Do you get what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like, and that's something that you've got to try not expose yourself to, because those were crucial points in the campaign when those fights were setting us back. I remember, and I remember like I was always like, it was such a, like, I definitely didn't do it perfect either. It was such a difficult tension to manage, like that. I mean, that's why struggle is important, because it's where you learn that stuff. But yeah, I don't think when we got it right, it was so great. But when we got it wrong, that was like, we would have done it differently in retrospect.
Any last thoughts? No, cool. My very, very last thought is thank you to Right Edwig for having me yabber on down memory lane, and for everyone for coming along to engage about how to build campaigns like this. I think like the other thing about these campaigns is they stay in a memory. Like I've posted about this a couple of times, the 5-year anniversary right now, and the person who read that petition out to the dean and the Vice Chancellor, Provost at the time, she wasn't massively involved in like the occupation and other stuff, but she replied back to me like, that rage in me will burn forever. Like that changed my life. And everyone who I talked to in doing, researching my thesis and stuff, like the amount of tears that flowed, the laughs that were had, like the sort of, this changed who I was because of being that involved in this. And Liam, you brought up in the thing before, the breakout room before, like someone was reciting poetry recently, and they were like, this comes from this moment in this place. And for people who are in struggle, it is one of the most powerful things and transformative things. And that, that's not dead. There might not be a hell of a lot of struggle on the horizon, mass struggle, but actually we can build it. Actually, it can happen, and we can learn from it. And the embers of a new society, or the kernels of a new society, the embers can be flamed to big flames.